It's another day of podcasting fame for you and me, Tim.
Boy, isn't it? I was watching the weather today, and I was thinking it's a wonderful day, and then the clouds came in. Nope, it's not. And then the sun came out. Yes, it is. And I was thinking, no, it doesn't work that way, does it?
No, it's not kind of like projects, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not necessarily us who decide, project success, or it's a nice day or a bad day. We just sort of have to take what we're given and make success and make enjoyment out of it.
There's a little lesson in that. I know we're going to be talking about compliance, but I'm just going to take us off a little bit. There's a lesson in what you just said. And that is, if you look at the weather, someone's perfect weather may be someone else's not so nice weather. And I'm thinking that even when it comes to systems, when we do our project management, I know I beat myself up often as a project manager that I didn't do that as well. And yet my client is delighted. So, there's some lessons. There's some lessons in all of that.
We need to talk about this in the future. Let's put a little paper clip by the word project success and have a little discussion on that, because you're right on target with that. And in the future, let's talk about project success. But today, we're going to talk about compliance. What do you think of when you think of when you just think of compliance? Just the word.
Rules. Regulations,
Yeah.
regulations, right? Is that?
Yeah. And process.
Yeah.
I think of that. And, the other thing I think of is facilitation, because that's what facilitation is. It's stepping outside and ensuring that the process is followed. So if a project manager is about facilitation, then compliance is a lot of what we do. Make sure, not just that we're getting the right outcome, but we're following the right process.
Well, and I'm thinking that, compliance does sort of, it adds scope, it adds perhaps cost, it adds, it can be labor intensive. But imagine if we didn't have compliance and let just every project run roughshod over whatever it was trying to do. Can you imagine the chaos out there?
Well, and let's think about this. Number one, first of all, what about safety? Second of all, what about privacy and personal information? And now let's get into the project itself. See, this is where I got in trouble. Early on, I was thinking, I'm just going to take these people's word for it. I need to have OSHA sign off. And there's one guy in the organization who's OSHA 30 trained, right? And so I thought I'd just tell him, and he said, yeah, just tell me the date and I'll be fine. And I put it on his schedule, and lo and behold, oops, he took a vacation. Yeah, he took a vacation, and there was nobody else there, and I blew it. One of the things that we're going to have to talk about is actively and very thoroughly assessing risk around compliance. When I looked at the new PMI training material for project management, I was thinking, boy, they're talking about risk and compliance and how they go hand in hand. But that's what I made a mistake on. I didn't make a mistake on understanding compliance or scheduling or planning for it. What it is, I didn't assess the risk of non-compliance effectively enough. And that got me in trouble. So I think we're going to have a little bit of discussion about many topics of compliance here.
Well, so for the benefit of particularly younger, or I should say, perhaps less experienced project managers, those who are wondering at this point, what are we talking about? Maybe we could define it. And if I can simply define it, I would say it deals with meeting rules or standards. I mean, that's meeting or exceeding, perhaps in some cases, rules.
And it's not just meeting them, but confirming and validating that you're meeting them.
There you go.
It's governance plus. It's basically governance applied to, are we following process and procedure? And again, that's, everybody doesn't like the project manager who says, did you document that? Or we need to get a third set of eyes on this and get signatures. But like I said, there goes my OSHA 30, and I can't step onto the work site until he comes back from vacation.
Oh, yeah. So there's an automatic stop work order for you, right?
That's right. That's
So
right.
I've done, obviously, we've talked about this many times, and I've done a lot of government type projects. And when I'm thinking of compliance, there's a lot of regulatory compliance with government projects. And I'm talking on one project, on a single project, I may have local regulations, state regulations, federal regulations, and I've actually run into in a couple of projects, global regulations. And the project has to be worked within those standards and regulations set up by all of those governing bodies. So at some point there, in order to comply, you also have to be aware.
Yeah, and the project manager has to be aware so they can ensure everybody else does. Now this is really important. It's not just, and I hate to be a broken record here, but it's not just that we're compliant. It's that we document and we validate. We can return back to the government and say, see, we did what you asked us to. Here's the piece of paper. Are we now authorized to do this, or are we authorized to move forward? And yeah, there's a cost to it. there's a real cost to it in time and money sometimes. But at the other hand, without it, we can't do certain types of work.
Well, and that goes on to, a lot of government regulations deal with things like national standards for how you capture and hold on to personal identifying information or personal financial information. And you have to be within regulation. You have to comply with those regulations. And before that system that we're building can go into production, we need to prove to the governing bodies that we have met those regulations to the letter of the law.
It's not just these big major projects either. Think about having a house built for you in construction, and you have a walkthrough when the house is ready for you, but you are not the only person that walks through. You do the functional approval, but the compliance, are they up to code with the electricity and the water and everything else, is a professional inspector that has to be paid, and they have to have their signature on certain piece of paper and certain tags that go on equipment in the house. And you don't move in unless that's there. Compliance is big, and it's comprehensive, and it's very thorough. And it's not just for the federal, state, or local government either.
Well, that's true. And the example that you just used of building a house, my wife and I have actually built more than one house during the course of our relationship. And here's what's interesting. You're right. We did the walkthrough in terms of, does this functionally satisfy our living arrangement in that property? What we never were aware of, except that we were told after the fact, that all along the way, county inspectors came on site and looked over the work of our contractor. Yep. We weren't even aware of that.
Yeah, I was really lucky. The person that managed the sale of the house for me, the purchase actually, was very, he wanted me to learn as much as possible. So he got approval for me to be there when the inspector was. And it really is a fascinating part of our world to see what it takes in the United States to move into a house. And it puts a really good understanding about when you start getting into these major projects that touch healthcare and that touch government processes that help so many people.
Well, try selling something over eBay. eBay has to be completely compliant in order the way it has to be PCI compliant in the way it captures your financial information, your credit card information. It has to be, there's other compliance issues. And in fact, was it last year, a couple of years ago, that the European Union put certain obligations on website sales, and the United States, other jurisdictions needed to comply if they wanted to be able to do business in Europe. So yeah, we're always having to be aware of. And these compliance measures are not put in there to create bureaucracy for us. They're put in there for our protection and for the protection of those we serve.
Yeah, yeah. They create a safe space for us to do business. And that's what we have to remember. It's just another form of discipline, and it's not intended to control us, but create an environment so that the wild stuff doesn't get in the way and mess us up.
Yeah. When I mentioned before that we did government a lot, that I've been involved in a lot of government projects. I mean, just think in terms of whenever I'm doing a new build into production, even just to do that new build, I have to put my code through different kinds of software protocols to make sure that every line of code is compliant and doesn't have any kinds of backdoors or anything like that in it. So there's a lot of dynamic testing and that sort of thing, just to make sure my code is compliant before it gets before it gets put out there for the public to use.
And let's not forget, there's also a level of compliance that says we agreed that this is the way we were going to do the work. We were going to do the work in this order. And that compliance, although informal, is necessary also for project success.
Well, something as simple as, how do I account for the revenue that I'm recognizing on the project? I have to now comply with general accounting principles.
Yes.
You as a project manager, you have to be always aware and always thinking of these things. And I don't want to dissuade anybody listening to us from wanting to become a project manager, because this is part of the learned experience, and it's part of what we do that makes us valuable to our projects and to our clients.
Yeah, and it's part of the growth and the maturity. Again, I'm exposed to this on a regular basis. You're exposed to it on a regular basis, but we both remember there were times when we were just given the schedule, and then we were given, the scope, and then we were given something else. And it was basically project management with training wheels for the first 3 years until we demonstrated, that becomes a habit and we're ready for more.
Well, and I remember, just exactly what you're saying. I remember as a younger project manager, being on a project where someone came up and said, "That's a great looking screen, but if I were a blind person, would it read back to me properly?" And I said, "What are you talking about? How do I know if it would read back, with screen readers and that sort of thing?" And they said, "Aren't you testing for the American Disabilities Act compliance?" I said, "No, but I guess I'm going to."
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. It's now the checklist item.
It is. And so we did. We found software that's compliant in terms of it does functionally what a person with disabilities would do, and it comes back and tells me whether or not my screen is compliant before I even put it out to the public. So yeah, you learn all along, and some of these things come along. But maybe that's a good question for us to answer for our audience right now, is where do we identify compliance needs? How do we identify them, and where?
That is a good one. I always have my traditional checklist. Number one, what does business require? There's some external and internal environmental factors, and you mentioned some of them earlier, right? They're the government, they're the safety, there's the industry compliance, and then there's the organizational preference. They're not necessarily laws and rules, but they're policies, and they're simple too. But at the same time, it's like starting on the outside of the onion and going in until you get to the core of the work itself. And then you can develop some methodology, some systematic way to take a comprehensive review of the context and put it through that compliance filter.
In fact, there's companies out there who will do compliance audits for you, which is obviously helpful, though it's not inexpensive.
Right. Well, and if you're just starting out, there's some business tools that we use for environmental assessment of organizations and corporations like Pestle, right? And we
Mhm.
look at the political, environmental, social, technological, legal, and we can use these type of filters too, prompt lists and checklists. You can find a lot of those. The brilliant thing is these are beginning to be listed more and more in the traditional project management documentation, like the process group practice guide. If you're looking for tools, that's a great place to start.
It is, and I guess I also want to look at it from the perspective of, let's say I'm bidding into a request for proposal, whether it's for a government organization or for a corporation. Typically, those requests for proposal will also list all of the compliance activities that will have to be met in order for you to even bid on the project. So if I'm bidding as a minority-owned business or a women's-owned business or a disabled veterans-owned business or whatever, there's all of the compliance factors already listed within the request for proposal that I can look at, and I have to meet those just to be able to bid on the project.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Reading these compliance requirements in an RFP is much like reading a contract that says, we will agree on this. And when those compliance things don't fit in, there's not a common natural flow. I scratch my head and I wonder what mistake happened, or I
Yeah.
wonder what exposed them to making this so important on this project. And these little details are the things I use to get into the mindset of my clients and the people I'm going to be working with for the next few years.
And truth be told, some of those are just there as part of the boilerplate. For example, I may be bidding on and this has happened to me, where I bid on a situation into a government IT project and was required to tick off compliance with something to do with water quality. Well, my IT system had nothing to do with water quality. And in fact, most of my team was remote, but that was part of the boilerplate. And we had to go through it and say, yes, we will adhere to water quality. I suspect if I had been an engineer bidding on a different kinds of project, that exact same language would have been there as well. So some of it's just boilerplate, but we still have to comply.
Oh yeah. And there are rules and regulations for reasons. It's a fascinating world. But again, it makes our job a little more complicated, but it also opens us up and exposes us to a level of professionalism we may not have been driven to, like you, and the readability of a screen to a blind person that enhances your ability to deliver to a much broader audience.
Well, exactly, and it makes me a good corporate citizen when I implement that. And that's the other thing is I don't look at compliance measures as being something that's out there that's bureaucratic or punitive. It's out there to make us all part of this great community that we belong to, so that when we serve the public, we serve them in a compliant fashion.
Yeah, it's becoming unselfish.
Yeah.
So what I think we have a good understanding of what type of compliance. Now, how serious do the compliance get? When do you, I assume you have a lot of external stakeholders and entities that have to help you on a lot of your compliance activities. Is that right?
Not so much anymore, because we've done so many of them that we've learned how to be compliant. Clearly, we have people within the organizations that keep abreast of regulations. So I may have, for example, personal identifying information standards today. If that changes tomorrow, we have someone who pays attention to that and lets us know what the new rule has been added. So it's not so much that we go to the external, is that we understand what it is that we need to do to be able to serve that client and keep abreast of those regulations.
Yeah, even in an informal environment, I find myself when someone is selecting me, they ask me a lot of fundamental questions, and I can have two responses to them in the pre-contract interview. I can say that's insulting to me because I learned that 20 years ago, or I can say, yeah, in fact, this is part of my experience. In fact, I advise corporations in this, and I'm an expert in this, and I can not only do that, but I can enhance. So to think that somebody is forcing you to double check yourself, it's not a limiting factor. Once again, we're not looking at limiting factors. They're opportunities to enhance your value, because that's what project management is. Project management is setting aside a whole work entity, a head, a unit of labor, in order to make sure the work is not just completed, but it's done within a certain set of criteria. And one of those criteria is it following process?
Well, it doesn't hurt to be reminded of what it is that we already know. I'm going to take a very stupid little, simple little example. I traveled, I've got something like 4 million miles of air miles under my belt. So that would suggest that I've spent a lot of times on airplanes and in hotels. Now, after a while, that becomes rote in terms of packing for the trip, unpack, that sort of thing. And you think, I've done this 1,000 times. It's easy. It's easy until you show up at your client site, get ready for a major meeting, and find out that you left your dress shoes at home.
Yes.
Now, how many times have I packed my dress shoes? 1,000. It didn't hurt to be reminded, perhaps with a checklist, said, do I have my dress shoes?
Yeah.
Fortunately, and just to finish that story, fortunately, I had an hour before the meeting and there was a shoe store on the way. So I walked in with very brand new gleaming shoes. But it's simple little things. It does not hurt to be reminded of things we already know.
And here's another one. When you're in commercial construction for telecommunications, like cell towers and data centers and central offices, there's a whole Bible of standards and policies and regulations you have to follow. And one of those regulations is you're going to tie your data cables on your network down every 18 inches. And you're allowed a little flexibility in the materials you use, but how you tie it down is really important. And, it's like, no, everybody on my team knows that, but can I go through a 4-floor, 24,000 square foot data center before it's inspected and ensure every 18 inches there's a cable? And if I can't see it, if it's not a fact to me, shame on me.
That's an interest. So as you're doing the work, you're figuring out ways to be able to prove the compliance of the work you're doing.
Yeah,
as opposed
yeah,
to even
yeah.
after the fact.
Yeah, exactly. This and that's the way it should be. We think of compliance as at the end because it's a sign off, right?
Yeah.
But all of a sudden we're talking about project closure, like we did a week or 3 ago. It doesn't happen at the end of the project. It's planned in. It's progressively elaborated. It's something that we exercise and we demonstrate. So at the end, it's just a signature.
So, that's a great lead into, and if I can use the example, going back to the screen readers for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Think of this in terms of what you just talked about in terms of planning. If I'm going to meet that American Disabilities Act requirement in order for my IT software to be certified as compliant with ADA requirements, I'm going to build that into my schedule. I'm going to look at probably have a task in there that talks about what are the exact requirements of the ADA standards for persons with disabilities. I'm going to look at how I can design that into my various screens. I'm going to look at what the tools are and procure those tools. So each one of these items becomes an element of my project schedule.
Correct. And yes, it seems, like a little heavy-handed or reinventing the wheel, but you know what? On a major project, sometimes that is not a labor, it's not an effort. Sometimes it's actually a sense of security and confidence. When I have 1,000 work packages and I'm demonstrating compliance all the way through, it's like, wow, I don't have to worry about that. It's there. I know the inspection's going to be fine there and there and there.
So it doesn't hurt to put interim deliverables or interim milestones on your project schedule to check yourself along the way.
Yeah, and again, we have milestones now for scope, milestones now for quality. Why not milestones for compliance and governance and all these other things that can trip us up? A milestone is nothing more than a marker. It's a reminder that says we have to do something.
So do you involve your team in the compliance, in making sure that you are compliant? Do you involve your team in that?
Oh yeah. And I like everybody to experience both sides. I have this is what's beautiful. If somebody writes code, I like somebody else to review it. If somebody reviews code, I want them to actually understand the writing of the code too. And so that we actually work as a comprehensive group, not just, it's very easy when you have these types of audits and inspections to go us versus them. It's like a QA inspection, a quality audit, right? It's them that caused the problem. No, it's not them. It's the code that caused the problem. It's the work that caused the problem. And when you have people working together side by side, the culprit is not people anymore. It's actually, the work itself. That needs to be solved, and it creates a more comfortable and a more relaxed environment that way. So getting everybody involved is not a bad thing, as long as they don't see it as a burden.
Well, and that's exactly right, because after all, the final product that you're delivering is the team's product, not an individual's product. So if I'm reviewing your code, Tim, it's not to say that Tim's not doing a good job or Tim's doing a wonderful job. Is my client getting the best job that our team can produce?
That's exactly right. And that actually echoes down through the professional relationship of the group, where somebody checking in on me, it's not, are you getting your work done? But is it, you're all right? Is there something we can help you with? And these little tiny things, just the nuance of not what you say, but how you say it, actually create these things like, sign off for very serious parts of the project. They're no less serious, but they're a little less daunting to everybody who participates in it.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's not just for IT, that's for anything, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that cell phone that you're holding in your hand, I suspect that went through several compliance factors in terms of just being able to issue it to the marketplace.
One of my co-owners was really good on this. He actually, when we were getting a cell tower inspected to get it turned back on, and he had two of the youngest engineers working with him, and he pointed out something to him. He said, you notice the attention to detail here? Look at the way it is. It's not quite the way everything else is. It's a little bit off. It's a little bit sloppy. And he said, it's not this item that's bad, but it's the other 9 items that represents that could also reflect that poor effort. And who knows where that would be, tying tying the wires down to the antennas or ensuring the power cables are just so and that kind of thing. And it's an opportunity for us to actually not just get the work done, but help people understand the value of the work and a little pride in delivery as well.
And oh, that is so important. I mean, I'm going to tell a little story that goes back before the time of even spreadsheets, electronic spreadsheets. I was working a project as a project manager, and my team, to be compliant with what the client required, we had to turn in timesheets, not just for our own accounting as a company, but for what the client was expecting from our team. And it would frustrate me because I had to have an administrative person spend an entire afternoon every Friday to go through timesheets because they weren't added up correctly. And I finally pulled the team together and I said, folks, if you can't add up a timesheet, how can I trust your code? And it's that attention, it's that attention to detail. And, compliance helps us in attending to detail, but it's that attention to detail that tells me you're serious about the work you're performing for me and for my clients.
Yeah, that's a very powerful message. I've had similar discussions. And once you actually communicate it in that manner, it doesn't have to be stated again. They
Right.
realize that, that sense of pride of ownership, that phrase gets so used, it has totally no meaning, right? But they actually have that sense of pride of ownership once that they do that. I practice my handwriting, not because, well, partly because it's fun and I enjoy the hobby, but also it's that sense of pride of ownership, of saying, I like to have handwriting that looks nice because my work, I feel, is nice. And shouldn't the way I write reflect my work? It's the same thing.
That's incredible. I just read an article this very morning that says one of the top 10 things disappearing from our culture is the ability to write in cursive.
Maybe we can start a movement, not just to write in cursive, but have all project managers start using fountain pens. Really, that's pushing the limit, though.
Do you think we can create a compliance regulation to comply with that?
I don't think so, but it's a wonderful idea. But yeah, it's that sense of self-respect and the confidence gained from doing work well when you set those boundaries a little higher than normal. Not out of reach, but something that people have to consciously work for.
I'm like you. I'm so old school. I still send birthday cards out every month to probably 10 to 12 individuals every month.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, I handwrite them. These are not electronic birthday. These are actual handwritten with a stamp, and a handwritten address on the envelope. What was interesting is someone approached my wife the other day and said, "So thank you so much for the birthday card." And she said, "Oh, it wasn't from me, it was from my husband." And they said, "Oh, he writes so beautifully. I thought it had to be yours."
No, that's what practice does.
It's what
practice does. So I have a question for you. We're talking about compliance, and I mentioned risk and compliance early on with my first example.
Yeah.
How do you see risk and compliance interacting and being connected?
Well, in my world, to not be compliant is to risk a lot. So let me take something as simple as, let's say, when I deliver a project and I'm responsible for the uptime of that project. And let's say that the compliance requirements are that I cannot have more than 5 minutes of downtime a month outside of planned downtimes. And to be more than 5 minutes downtime in a month, for every 5 minutes that I go down, or more than 5 minutes I go down, it's a $10,000 fine or $10,000 penalty. You can see that from that perspective, it becomes real. And often, many of the projects that I work on have liquidated damages, so much so that you can't really calculate the damage done to the client by something going wrong with the system. So therefore, they just kind of create a liquidated damage factor for each event. And I've seen projects where liquidated damages can go into the millions of dollars. So yeah, it becomes very serious.
Yeah, and let's continue on that thought. First of all, at a general level, okay? So when you're non-compliant, there's a very high chance that non-compliance is not just going to impact your project, it's going to impact business.
Yes.
Which is very serious.
Yep.
You're hitting revenue and profit targets. And if you don't think that's serious, try to see what happens when you do that inside of a company. Second of all, liquidated damages is really serious. Let's take one factor, HIPAA compliance, Health Information Portability and Privacy Act, right?
Yeah.
So this started back in the middle 2000s. The federal government said, if you have a data breach, even if it's possible that privacy or personal information was stolen, you have to communicate it. Number one, you have to publicly communicate it so the company is shamed. Number two, you have to pay a minimum of $400,000 per event. Number three, you have to communicate with every person who was potentially, not really, but potentially impacted. And then you have to remunerate them in some way for all future disadvantage from having their data exposed. That's where the millions and millions of dollars come in.
Yeah.
We're getting into, even if they hit 500 or 1,000 people, you're getting into $4.5 to $5 million in damages right there.
Well, and somebody may say, well, what's 5 minutes in a month? What's 5 minutes in a month if you are a stock trading company in the middle of a busy day? Millions of dollars lost right there. So compliance is hugely a risk that you have to be able to mitigate.
And think about this. Think about companies like Rackspace. Rackspace doesn't work with the public. They're a big data center company, right? They provide data centers to companies like Amazon Web Services and to Amazon and other people. And they get fined not just by the government, but by their clients as well. Their contracts are wrapped up on that. And we're talking about 8 seconds a year. They have to be compliant to be stable. They have to build entire data centers that fail over on the event that a data center goes out. And we're talking to cover if we have a minute of downtime. This stuff is serious to business.
Well, we were talking one day, you and I, and this is I can mention the company name because it was public. For example, when Target had that data breach.
Right.
So they had to not only remunerate, I think Target, if I recall, didn't they have to also pay for some sort of monitoring of each person's credit for the next year or two? I think they had to pay for that.
And the federal government puts it at 5 to 7 years, I think. But it's first of all, you say it's ridiculous. Second of all, you say, if it was my data, I'd make them pay for that the rest of my life, right?
Yeah.
It's not ridiculous. The thing is, our clients are coming to us and they have clients themselves.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, the reason I mentioned Target, again, not that my wife, my kids shop at Target. We love Target, but they did suffer not just that monetary penalty, but they suffered reputationally as well for some time before they were able to recover from that. So again, these are risk factors that need to be built into our project schedules, but then also once we're in maintenance and operations, to be built into our operations as well.
And this is where I started to understand why we need risk management, particularly around compliance. We have a habit of thinking compliance as the signature. It's just, let's get that signature in place. Let's get that inspection out of the way. It's an event. But what that event and that signature represents is incredibly powerful. And so what we need to do is educate ourselves and also inform everybody else. And the best way to do that is put it as a risk, a project risk that we manage and we talk about and we leave up on the dashboard. What's the risk of that gentleman going on vacation? What will that do? Oh, it'll push our project out 10 days. Yeah. And that means that our client is going to miss 10 days of sales. What are we going to do about that?
Well, exactly. And I was thinking, I've done some work in, for example, the state of California, which has areas that are earthquake prone. So one of the mitigating factors of the potential to lose uptime, to lose data, to lose a whole data center was a backup and recovery process in a whole different state that was not prone to earthquakes or natural disasters. So just something like that, it was expensive to have that duplicative off-site failover site, but at the same time, the service being provided by the California corporation was so incredibly important. They had to be able to fail over in case of a disaster. And the other part of complying with that, not just to have the mitigation by having your failover site in another state, we also did disaster recovery tests every 6 months to make sure that the failover actually worked and continued to work. So again, the whole risk process that we're talking about requires that we're attuned to what could happen and put measures in place to make sure that if it does happen, that we still are compliant with what it is that we need to do.
That's exactly right. And again, it's not necessarily that we need to demonstrate that it works. What it is we have something in place that actually protects the project and protects the business. Yeah. We have confidence. It's that education, the analysis, and creating that wall of discipline that says we feel safe.
Well, and you had mentioned before that compliance isn't just the signature. So to create that disaster recovery site and to test it one time allowed us to have the signature. But we weren't compliant without testing every 6 months because things happen in the meantime and you want to make sure that you're always ready. So you're right. It's not just the signature; it's the ongoing past the signature.
And it can actually fall over on the opposite side of the fence too. We were doing a risk assessment, and we were trying to do some high-level scoping for a project charter. This was a data center up in the Pacific Northwest, and this was in the mid-2000s. And there's 7 active volcanoes, and just as recent as in the mid-1980s, one of them had gone off, right? And so we were thinking of a similar strategy, having an offsite data center that was all dark except when we had failover, and we wanted to place it out of state. And the CIO said, no, I choose to accept that risk. I'm not going to do anything about it. We're going to recognize that risk and we're going to formally accept it. And his logic was brilliant. Mm-hmm. He said, okay, the data center is here. The backup data center is halfway across the country. The corporate headquarters are here right by the data center. So if the data center gets wiped out by a volcano, the corporation gets wiped out, and we have no need for a backup data center.
Well, that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, he maintained that corporate headquarters functioning required a physical location, and due to that, but you know what? we wouldn't have understood our client as well unless we asked and we
Right.
tested and we did that risk identification. Maybe sometimes that's all you need to do
Yeah.
is expose that and confirm that this is important yet.
I had a very similar situation to that. And the difference was that this corporation that I was working for in the particular state I was working in, had their headquarters and their data center several miles apart. So at least that way, if there was a tremor or if there was a tornado or if there was a hurricane or whatever, it didn't matter because the likelihood of both getting hit and wiped out were very slim. So.
And that's smart business.
Yeah.
That's smart business. So here's the last question around risk, and I think we'll be good. It seems like a lot of this risk and a lot of this compliance work is not necessarily going through the action, but it's actually communicating and sharing ideas and coming to an agreement on this is important enough that we need some type of a process that oversees that we're following this other process. How important do you see this as a tool of communication?
Oh, it's very important. If you think about how we've talked about risk in the past, we always look at risk as a potential, something that could happen. It doesn't become an issue until it happens, right? But we're always looking ahead. What could be on the horizon? And if I've got, if I'm sitting in my desk in my office with the door closed, and I've got, I've got these 10 things that I have to really keep track of. And if I'm not communicating them, I'm going to miss them. But someone out there who is also aware and alert can help the entire team, the entire project edifice. We can all understand what's about to occur if everyone's alert and aware. Communication is critical.
Yeah, and it gets everybody on the same side of the piece of paper, and it also gets everybody focused on priorities. And that's basically what compliance is. Once again, compliance is saying we think this is so important that we're going to put extra effort and extra people on the project to say we are doing it correctly, and we're demonstrating it to us, and we're demonstrating it to other entities as required.
And sometimes government projects get a bad rap. But one of several things the government does well when it comes to IT is that they put those requirements right in place, right up front, so that you don't have to guess at what you have to do to be compliant. It's right there. Just understand what it takes. And here's the other part that the government does well is they will pay you for it. In other words, they value it, and so therefore they're willing to pay for it. So that's, to me, that's if the government's willing to pay for it and major corporations are willing to pay for it, we understand how important that is to the entire project. By the way, we talked earlier, I think that one of the better ways to maintain the communication about these sorts of compliance and risks that can be associated with compliance is, again, through the schedule.
Yeah. There's the schedule. I use a modified schedule. I have a schedule for analysis, and I share schedule as it's appropriate with the different level of decision makers. But then I have a milestone schedule, and my milestone schedule usually goes in the dashboard. And then again, we see, okay, here's the scope being created, the milestones for that. Here's the quality being maintained. Here's the milestones for that. And here's the governance and compliance being performed. And here's that. And talk about a sense of confidence. See, if you have your scope milestone, we're 25% of the deliverable, we're 33, now we're 50. You get confidence in creating something. When you have compliance, you actually have 33, then 45, then 50, then 60% compliant. And all of a sudden, you can say, we're confident that we're doing the work correctly at that level throughout the life of the project. And that's an important statement, not just to carry inside yourself, but to share and communicate with the group.
Yeah. Oh, so important. Well, this has been great. And I think if we're going to be compliant with our agreement to keep within the hour.
Yeah, let's tie it up. Where's the one last question I think will be good. Where would you start a project manager when they want to actually start adding more and more formal compliance on their projects?
I would start with what the regulations are in terms of perhaps my industry, but certainly in terms of the client that I'm serving. If I'm in-house, the client I'm serving is also in-house. If I'm doing this as a for-profit work for an external client, I have to understand their compliance features. So where I would start with a newer or less experienced project manager is to have them understand and to actually begin the research and the reading of what's required for those clients, for those customer base that I'm serving.
It's the business environment in the industry that drives a lot of these things. And then inside the company, you have finance and legal and quality and other entities that actually say you have to do it this way, and get them exposed, or expose yourself to how they run business and why they're asking you to do things certain ways. And I think that actually helps us understand, not just what compliance is and why it's important, but how broad it can be, not just deep.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in situations where on behalf of my client, being brought in as an advisor, working with them, that before certain memos that I send to their system integrator, before I even send those memos out, I have learned enough to take it past my client's legal, to make sure that it's represented correctly. Because you don't want to ever get on the wrong side of things just with the memo. Yeah. And so there's times, and this comes with experience. This comes with questioning yourself, but there are times when you have to look at who do I really need to involve in making sure that I'm compliant in this next action.
Very good. And on that note, I think we put the cherry on top of the ice cream.
I hope so.
Where can we find you if we want to look you up this week?
Just Merv Jersak at LinkedIn. Just find me there, and my phone is set up, and I get these little alerts every time I get a LinkedIn message. Boom, it comes up on my phone. So I'm fairly responsive that way.
I am on LinkedIn. I think you'll see some interesting conversations that I'm building. Very good. But yeah, please reach out.
All right. And until next week, I think this is a wrap.
Thanks again, everybody. And thank you, Merv.